everyone. I'm Robbie, and this talk is in Poppins. It will also be in PMEs, or as I prefer to call it, mathsplaining. First, what I sort of want to talk about today, first up, is sort of how to measure growth. What are the metrics that you want to look at, and how fundamentally all it is answering the question, are people getting value from my product? Then I want to talk a little bit about how do we actually use these metrics? How do you create a good metric? What are the sort of patterns that you should look for, and which ones should you focus on? And then I want to talk more about, okay, once you've got these metrics, how do you actually build something around that? It's great to have the numbers. But first up, my own kind of wandering journey to give you a little bit of context for sort of me and who I am. I'm from New Zealand originally. That's why I've got the funny accent. I came here about 8 years ago to go to graduate school, and from there I wound up at Zynga. I saw a Zynga t-shirt wandering around somewhere. I was working on Farmville, the big Facebook game, back when that was a thing that we did. If you ever used the unicorn feature, that was me. And from there I wound up at SurveyMonkey, so online surveys. I ran the mobile team there. And so the sort of squirrely part from there is I wound up at Intercom, which, as Andy said before she said the other thing, is a way that businesses talk to their customers. Another way to frame it is that little chat thing in the bottom right corner. If it was a bad one, probably someone else. If it was a good one, that was us. Where I've done a whole bunch of different types of growth work. We've done pricing and packaging, the trial and sign-up experience, a little bit of onboarding. And if you want to know what I'm going to talk about, Megan pretty much spoiled the whole thing with her really articulate explanation of kind of how they measure growth at LinkedIn. But I'm going to say it for you in a few more words and a slightly different accent. But the sort of, these are slightly older slides. All right. The TLDR of this whole thing is like make something people want. If you take one thing away from this chat, all growth, it can seem complicated. There's lots of metrics, ins and outs, ratios, but fundamentally it all comes back to actually making something people want. The metrics for growth are trying to measure that, and the way to actually get growth out of your product is to do that. And in a classic oblique fashion, I want to start with a story. This is a story about two mobile apps from a couple of years ago. On the left, your left, yes. On the left, we have Down to Lunch. Down to Lunch was this kind of big sort of VC hit for a little while. You were able to, as you can see in the little layout there, say, hey, I'm willing to do this sort of thing with my friends in this area. And then your friends could say, hey, I want to do that as well. On the right, you've got Musical.ly, which is now TikTok, which was basically like karaoke that you could kind of send to your friends. So two consumer mobile apps. Musical.ly, if you look at downloads, the vanity metric, which Megan mentioned, was kind of cruising along. It was a really popular app, I think top 10 in the App Store. And then out of nowhere comes Down to Lunch and surpassed Musical.ly, right? And a lot of press around both. We saw there was a ton of hype for both of them. And the question I sort of want to answer today is, well, which one of these is better? Which of these products is healthy and which is not? Which is experiencing growth and which isn't? Because it looks like one is from this chart, but I actually want to tell you it's not. But first, a little bit of mathsplaining. How do you actually measure growth? I want to say to you today that there's kind of really only three things that we're measuring in growth. The first thing is acquisition, which in this case is downloads, which is basically like people signed up. Are people signing up for your product? Are they coming in the door? The next thing you could measure is engagement, which just put really simply, there's lots of ratios you can use, is are people using your product? The third one is retention. You'd measure it through retention rate. Do people keep using your product? All of growth on some level comes down to these three metrics. Are people signing up? Are they using it? And then are they coming back to use it? That is exactly as simple as growth is and precisely as hard as growth is. And what I want to say is that the acquisition, as Megan said up front, getting people in the door, actually not that hard. You can actually pay Google to do it for you through AdWords. But it's actually getting people to first use your product and then come back and use it. That's actually the trick. It's also really hard, but that is where the value is, and that's where we should be looking. So let's jump back to our mobile apps. So we saw Down to Lunch and downloads, acquisition, people coming in the door, rocketing up, surpasses Musical.ly. But what we actually see is that if we look at the usage, the engagement in the product, people weren't really using Down to Lunch. Even though there's a whole lot of hype, a ton of downloads, these people would come in, their friends weren't on it, they'd open it once, and that was it. Whereas Musical.ly, people were coming back to, and they had a really large user base of people that were using it regularly. As a result, what happened is we saw a really strong retention for Musical.ly. So week on week, a lot of Musical.ly users were back the next week. They got some Musical.ly, they wanted some more Musical.ly, and so on and so on. Down to lunch, people tried it once, most of them didn't come back. These are the things that actually predict what happens in the future. And by looking at this, especially if we layer on Snapchat, which is a sort of popular app kind of in the same vein, Musical.ly is actually not quite, but close to the same level in both engagement, so people getting value, and retention, people coming back again, as Snapchat. That's actually really good. Musical.ly was a very successful app at the time, rebranded to TikTok, and has continued to be successful over many years. Down to lunch, by contrast, we had a whole lot of users come in and a whole lot of users come out. Lasted about 6 months. The founders tried to raise money. They couldn't raise money. And I don't know if it's still kicking around somewhere, but it was a true flash in the pan. And this is all sort of foreseeable if you actually looked at the metrics. And the metrics aren't that kind of complicated. All they're asking, or the answers to the questions are people using the product, and then are they coming back to use the product? And that really is what we're measuring in growth. So, doing growth right, my Poppins has shrunk a little bit. 4 main things for today. So one is focus on engagement and retention. Make sure you're measuring the right things. The second thing is make sure you measure it right that I want to talk about. Measure real value, not kind of vanity metrics within growth. Focus on keeping the users you already have. And then ultimately it's about solving customer problems. So measuring real value. What do I mean? Back to my mobile apps again. When we say engagement or real value, what do we measure? Lots of kind of metrics here. Days used per week, engagement, daily active users over weekly active users, all these kind of numbers you can throw around. The right thing to measure is what aligns with value for your product. So 2 examples here, Uber and Netflix. What's the right measure of engagement, someone getting value from Uber? It's not opening the app. If you open the Uber app and you try to find a ride, but you couldn't, you go to Lyft or you sort of take the bus, that's not getting value. What Uber should be measuring here is something like riders per week. Are you actually successfully taking a ride? That's what you want to measure. And if you're Netflix, and I know that they measure it this way, opening Netflix and watching a bit of a show, that's actually not value, because if you're just sort of scrolling around, finding a few things in that state of I can't find anything I kind of really want to watch, Netflix kind of sucks, that's not a great experience, and you're not going to kind of stick around. You haven't got value. Netflix, at least at one point in time, used the metric of people that have viewed Netflix for at least 20 minutes in a given week. 20 minutes, of course, is not a random number. It's about the length of a show without the commercials and the credits. Right? So Netflix is saying you've got to watch a show on Netflix to actually get value. Users who have viewed for more or 20-minute plus views a week, it's a bit of a mouthful. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's just, did you watch a show on Netflix? The number can seem kind of complicated and there's a bunch of ways to measure it. But at its core, it's did you watch a show? Because if you watched a show, you'll probably come back and watch a show next week. And that's how you grow a business. All right. Next piece is the idea that you want to keep the users that you already have. So working backwards through your funnel from retention back to engagement, back to acquisition is often the way you want to do it. And here's a little example. A really common way to measure retention is to say, well, of all the people who signed up last week, how many people are still here this week? And how many people are here next week and the week after? So time on the x-axis here and the percentage of your signups in a given week on the y-axis. It looks like the blue line's higher. In the early weeks, hey, this product, whatever it is, it's keeping people engaged, and we're seeing that the orange curve is a little bit lower, right? They're not as successful as getting people engaged. What I want to say, if we're looking at this kind of retention, what matters actually is where that curve flattens off, right? Because in this particular example, if you push out through time, we see that blue slowly bleeds people, continually bleeds people. They every week loses a few. Whereas with orange, what we see is a bunch of people bleed off, and then the curve flattens out. What this is sort of saying in math is that you want to build something that really appeals to a smaller group of people. They're being blah to a whole lot. The blue product is blah to a whole lot of people. Everyone kind of uses it for a bit, but it's not quite right. Whereas the orange one, a bunch of people are coming in and going, oh, actually, this is not quite right for me. But a whole lot of them are saying, oh, this totally solves problems that I have, and they're sticking around. They really build it as a habit into their lives. So what actually matters less is the is the height of the curve. That's not so important. It's that it goes flat. You and your product to have these retention curves go flat. People that, after they get in and have this kind of entry period to decide whether they're going to stick with you or not, they really stick well. That matters much, much more than the fact that, hey, everyone bleeds out, but just really slowly. All right. The secret actually to all of this, at the sort of bottom of all these things, is really solving customer problems. What you want to do is solve customer problems, because what you might be saying is, cool, all these numbers are great, but how can I actually use this? How can I kind of design with this? And the sort of really good news is that as designers, you guys are in a great place, because design's all about solving problems for customers, and growth is precisely that. Because if there's the opposite of what I want you to do, it's this. The sort of classic growth hack, or the kind of thing you might hold up, is the notifications. We miss you. Where did you go? We haven't seen you in a while. If you sort of continue that sentence, like, we don't miss you. We miss your money. We miss your sort of eyeballs. We miss your attention. I don't miss you. And what it misses is that your relationship with the company is not good. We're not friends, right? Yes, more personal relationships are going to be better, but fundamentally there's an exchange of value there, right? You never forget to open iMessage. iMessage don't go, hey, you've got some text messages. You absolutely open that, because what's in it's incredibly valuable. It's your friends, your partners, your lover. All these people are communicating with you through iMessage. And so this sort of stuff, we always think, let's see more notifications, or maybe some emails or some pop-ups or something like that. If it's related to something that matters, hey, your mother has sent you some money. Yeah, that'll work pretty well. But if it's just like, hey, come back, there's, some more bullshit's happened, like that fundamentally won't work. You might get a little bobble, but if you're measuring engagement right, which is actually getting value out of the product, not just opens or kind of, weekly active users or something, you'll find that you actually don't see much of a movement. So you want to measure it right. And if you're measuring it right, you'll find that these kind of easy-seeming changes, which are not actually related to core product value, don't work. Instead, what you got to do is design product features that impact your business results. And that's really easy to say, but there's a very curvy line in that whole process. And what I've found that makes it a little bit easier is to break out some of those intermediate steps. And the intermediate steps I want to put to you is that every feature, everything you ship is exactly the same. First, you ship some sort of product feature. As a product team, as a designer, that's what you make, right? You change some pixels around, or you add a button or something like that, and this is what you sort of put out into the world. But that's got to solve some problem for someone. All buttons are not created equal. And if that button's really useful, then it's going to solve customer problems. And if it solves a problem for someone, or it kind of fills a need, then what you'll see is their behavior changes. There's some measurable customer behavior in the product. They come back more, or they kind of use this feature or something like that. And for certain kinds of behaviors, such as upgrading or coming back over the long term, you're going to see that in your business results. Everything you ship goes through this whole process. The thing about growth is you're doing it backwards. You sort of start often with business results. We're trying to drive engagement. We're trying to drive retention. We're trying to drive monetization. That's cool, but what are your top 5 ideas to drive monetization? How do we get more money? Well, let's send people emails and ask them for money. We're back at this we miss you stuff, right? The secret, again, to wind your way back to the features you should ship in order to actually get these business results, it's exactly the same thing. You got to figure out, what are the customer behaviors we need in order to impact particular business results? And what are the problems people have that are currently unsolved? And then we kind of design features to solve this. This last part, this is exactly what design is. And this is why designers are so well placed to be really core to any growth team. Because the things that work solve fundamental problems. It's not little kind of changes, notifications, and things like that. So to step back through each of these questions, what customer behavior would drive the desired result, right? That's analysis. Often you'll be working with your finance or your biz ops or your analytics team. And then, okay, well, what are the problems that drive this behavior? Why don't people come back as much as we would like them to? Why don't people use this feature as much as we think they should? Why do people struggle? Well, that's research, right? You want to understand what are the problems that result in you not having the behavior that you would like. And then fundamentally, okay, cool, we know what the problems are. What's the best way to solve this problem? That, my friends, is design. That's where you come in. And so it's super, super central. And I think that a lot of growth teams can kind of miss this and sort of wind up skipping from, we need to drive revenue, so let's just do this random thing. And what you'll find is that it's really hard to guess the random thing, but yet you'll generally do pretty well if you're making shots on goal this way, really figuring out the behaviors you want that are going to drive your business, and then what are the problems that are leading to those behaviors. Again, easy to say, and like figuring out exactly which problems to solve will drive behaviors is sort of more an art and a science, but at least you'll give yourselves a pretty good shot at that whole process rather than just kind of guessing and sort of going, let's just ship some more email notifications. Okay. As I said at the start, and this is what Megan said so articulately, it's all about just making something people want. There's a whole lot of numbers involved in growth, but at its core, what you're trying to do is make something people want. If you think about even Intercom, our business, the most successful onboarding feature or sort of startup feature we've ever shipped was actually utility. So Intercom is a product that allows you to talk to your customers. Previously, you had to install some JavaScript on your website. And when we found that when we added a way to upload a user list via a CSV, huge increase in activation and people that were getting started with the product. Solved a real problem. People are like, hey, I like Intercom, but how do I get all these existing users into the product? Right? That's not email notifications. It's not making the button bigger or like dividing two screens into one or something. It's real core product value. And like all the time, what you'll find is those kinds of things that really move the needle. So doing growth right. Make sure you focus on the right things, which is engagement and retention. Make sure you measure those things the right way, which is like that real value. Really keep the users you already have much, much easier and more effective than going out there and getting more acquisition. And fundamentally, the way you do all of this is by identifying and solving customer problems, which as designers is precisely what you've been taught to do. Thanks.